So first of all, welcome everyone to your Acing Applications webinar. We're going to talk you through your steps to success this application season. So we will kick off by introducing ourselves. First of all, I'm Sarah. I am Senior Content Marketing Manager at Bright Network. And to give a quick visual description of myself, I am a blonde white woman wearing a brown top and glasses. The reason that I am co-hosting today is I lead on Bright Network advice content, and I have researched and tested AI tools quite extensively for job application purposes. So hopefully I'm in a good place to talk you through how to use those tools responsibly. And I'll hand over to my co-host, Dylan.
Thanks, Sarah. And I'm Dylan. I'm a ginger white man wearing a purple t-shirt. And I'm a senior partner success manager at Bright Network, and I've been here for about 5 years. So as part of my job, I spend a lot of time interacting day to day with different employers across the UK. So some of the employers I work with would include RSM, Goldman Sachs, and Google. So hopefully over the course of this webinar, I can impart some of what I've learned to you and give you some advice.
Great. So just to give you all an overview of what we'll be talking through within the next hour, first we're going to cover how to find roles to apply for and how to do that with Bright Network. We'll then go through deciding whether or not to apply for roles and what employers want to see, bringing in some of Dylan's perspectives from working with our clients. Then we'll go through the kind of quantity versus quality of applications debates, as well as to use ChatGPT or not to use ChatGPT for job application support. And then we'll round off with what to expect from application processes. We'll just go through stage by stage and tell you what you might be seeing this application season. And then we'll finish with a Q&A where we will be answering your questions. So feel free to use the Q&A function on Zoom as much as you like throughout the session. We will just come to the questions at the end. You should also be able to upvote one another's questions. So if you can see someone's asked a question you agree with, just give them a thumbs up and we'll make sure to get to it. So I'll hand over to Dylan for the first section, which is how to find roles to apply for.
Thank you. Yeah, we basically wanted to start at the top, I guess, in chronological order. And the first thing you have to do, of course, is find the right role to apply for. So there's lots of ways to do this. Unsurprisingly, we've gone with a Bright Network-centric way of structuring your job search. But genuinely, these are some like tips that will help you out. So the first one we want to touch on was the career path test. So this is something that we've developed on Bright Network over the last couple of years. And essentially, it's just a quick quiz you can take, and the outcome of which will be a suggestion on which career path you could take. It's by no means, I guess, you have to pursue the career that it comes out with, but it's just quite a helpful way, I guess, to get some guidance initially, and something that genuinely Bright Network colleagues recommend to friends and family who are starting their job search. So this is where I would start. By being a member of Bright Network, you'll also have access to our weekly job match. So some of you may already have seen this, but this is essentially an email that goes out at the start of the week on a Monday. You might actually just be receiving it as this webinar goes on. But essentially what it does is it matches you to sort of 3 to 5 jobs on Bright Network. And the goal of this is to be targeted. So the jobs that you match with should be a fit based on your interests and your behavior on the platform. If they're not and they don't seem quite right, you can go into your preferences on Bright Network and update them. And this should sort any issues you're having. And then finally, it sounds really basic, but just using the filters to really structure your job search. So it can be really easy to sort of have that scattergun approach of just looking at everything because it can be a tricky time. But what I'd really recommend doing is using the filters down the left-hand side of the Bright Network search to hone in. So hone in on the type of job you're looking for. Is it a graduate job or an internship? The sector as well. So making sure you're being specific. And then finally, location. So just making sure, I guess, where you're looking for is going to fit with the locations you want to work in. We have also recently just updated our deadline tracker, which I'm just going to do a very quick demo of now because I appreciate it's quite a new feature on Bright Network. So I'm going to share screen. Hopefully this was better than the meta demo that happened recently. Cool. So all you need to do to start using the deadline tracker is find the job you want to apply to. So in this case, I'm going to go to Lidl's profile because I know they've got some jobs live. Click into the Lidl profile, and if I scroll down, I can see they've got a few opportunities live. The one I want to apply to is this marketing graduate program. but let's say I've already saved it. I'll unsave it first. Let's say don't want to apply to it right now. I might want to apply to it later. So rather than clicking apply now, I can click save. And what that'll do is add it to my deadline tracker. So if I click into here, essentially you can see all the jobs that I've looked at, almost earmarked to apply to later, but haven't yet submitted my application for. And what I can use this as is basically my plan for my application season. So I haven't applied to this one yet, but let's say I've submitted my application to their buying program. So I can move it to applied, and that again just helps me be really clear and organized with where I am. As I move through it, I can update this so I can move to interview. And then finally, if I'm successful, I can move it into offer. I've been given an offer, and that'll be put into here. If I've been unsuccessful, I can just check it off as unsuccessful and move on. So it's just a way of really structuring your job search. Once the deadline's passed and the role's closed, there'll also be an option to let us know that you secured a role so we can put together an article essentially shouting about your success. So that's how you can sort of use that deadline tracker to hopefully help you out in the application season.
Great. So just re-screen sharing here. Thank you for that demo, Dylan. So now we've taken you through how to find some jobs and how to actually track them when you're applying for them. We wanted to also talk you through deciding whether or not to apply for a job, because it can be hard when there are so many out there. But actually, I guess we'll start by talking you through why being selective about which jobs to apply for is helpful. So first of all, it saves time, not just yours, but the employers as well. If you are careful about which jobs you apply to, you can actually give yourself a much better chance of success, and save a lot of your time so that you're not filling out applications that won't get you anywhere. You're also likely to be a better fit for the jobs that you have actually had a closer look at before just hitting apply. So hopefully both you and the employer will be kind of a better fit for one another. Being selective about which jobs to apply to also gives you a bit more focus, and can help your job search feel more like a strategy and less like a kind of scattergun approach. And then it's also good for your well-being, because even though it might feel like you want to apply for loads and loads of jobs, what that ultimately means is if you're not that selective and you're not that qualified for all of them, you will be getting loads and loads of rejections, sorry. And we'll come to how to deal with rejections a bit later on in the webinar, but I think we can all agree it's not the best feeling to receive that. We regret to inform you email. So just being a bit selective can save you some of that as well. So I'm going to talk you through 7 key questions to ask yourself before applying for a job. And by following these kind of 7 questions, you should be able to apply much more selectively and then hopefully maximize your chances for success as well. So the first question is, do I meet the role requirements? Now, this might sound really obvious, but one question we do get asked a lot at Bright Network is, should we be applying for jobs if we don't have all the required experience? Because you've seen those job postings from employers, sometimes they're very long and they have a lot of requirements, and you wonder, okay, maybe I meet 90% of these. Should I still apply? Well, the answer is less about, I would say, the percentage of which requirements you do and don't meet. And it's more about making sure you do meet all the essential criteria. So first of all, make sure you meet any and all logistical criteria, such as the graduation year. If you need to be starting a job in September 2026, for example, you need to be available for it. That's number one. So don't rule yourself out straight away by applying for jobs that you're not kind of logistically eligible for. And then you should aim to meet all of the essential skill and experience criteria as well. And I would say the language of a job post can give you a good idea of which requirements you need to meet and which ones are more kind of like nice to have. So look out for words like must or must not. So for example, you must be due to complete your degree in 2026. The words minimum and maximum, usually quite inflexible. So I might say you must have a minimum of so-and-so experience. You should probably aim to have that. Similarly, with need to have, required, if the word expertise is in there, that's probably not something that you can work your way around, but these are going to be kind of probably less used in graduate and entry level roles, because obviously an employer is not going to ask you to have a certain level of years of experience when it's clearly a graduate role. So it's meant for people who don't have years and years of experience. But that being said, There will also be some nice to have criteria. So this is when you can look at a job description and think, okay, I'm meeting all of these must have kind of essential criteria. What can I kind of fudge, or what can I maybe get by on based on my other transferable skills? So anything that says ideally or is a plus. So for example, it might say in a job description, social media experience is a plus. That means it's okay if you don't have it. Ideally, you would, but they'll still be willing to make kind of a compromise. Like if you're the right candidate, it's something you can learn on the job. It's not something that you absolutely need to have. So meeting the right role requirements can be a tricky one because you need to make sure that you're qualified, but equally don't take yourself out of the running before you've even started, just because you see a long list of attributes that you may not have all of them. As long as you have the key ones, you should be all good to apply. So question number 2, does this job meet my requirements? So this is where you need to ask yourself if you'd actually be happy to take the job based on things like salary, working hours, location, start date, commute, training, career progression. So essentially, you should also think about whether the job fulfills your kind of key concerns. So where you live is going to be a big one. You need to make sure you can get to work. You need to make sure that your salary will support you. But you probably also have a wish list of kind of nice to have elements. So it would be great if your job did offer you certain benefits, but you'd be willing again to compromise for the right role. So have a think about what you'd actually want from your job as well. Next up is, does this job align with my career goals? So this is an important question to consider because when you're looking for jobs full time, it's easy to feel quite panicky and maybe a little bit desperate and send applications to every job you come across. Um, but actually, um, yeah, you need to be thinking not just about the kind of short-term need of getting a job, but the longer term needs as well. And I would say a good question to ask yourself is, could you see yourself staying in the role for more than 1 year? Because if you're going to leave before a year is up, then it might be worth keeping scrolling through that job board and finding a job that might be more better suited to you as well. Equally, if you don't know what your career goals are yet, that is totally fine as well. In that case, applying to a few different jobs might help you get to know what you want a bit better. And that's also a kind of great case where our career path desk can help you out, because if you're not sure what you want to do or what you want to achieve, getting to know yourself and your own goals could be helpful before you're then kind of questioning whether a job might be right for you. Would this job help me develop professionally? So think about the job and whether it involves tasks, projects, and situations that might push you out of your comfort zone. So obviously the comfort zone is a comfy place to be. However, as I'm sure you'll have all come across in your degree at some point, feeling challenged is really important for developing new skills and progressing in your career. So have a think about, do you think you'd be challenged in this role to the extent that it will keep you interested? And also what you can do is maybe have a little stalk of people on LinkedIn who've joined the company in recent years. Have they progressed in their roles? What is the promotion cycle like? Is this somewhere you can stay for a long time and progress into more senior roles? Is that what you'd want to do, or would you want to become more specialist? So have a think about that as well, and that kind of long-term impact that you might have in your role. This one is super, super important, but would you find the job engaging day to day? I think it can be hard to see from a written job description always whether or not it's the right job for you. So what I would actually recommend is having a look on social media for the kinds of roles that you're thinking about applying to. I've got a screenshot of a TikTok here, which is kind of day in the life content in a business strategy grad scheme. So if you're reading all this jargon about strategy and maybe yeah, stuff that you're not quite sure what it means in practice, have a look on social media, have a look at people's actual reviews that are in the role, because you might be able to get a bit more of a feel for what you're doing. You can also ask yourself questions like, can you see yourself talking to people all day, every day? Do you want to be in meetings a lot? Do you want to be collaborating? Or is your idea of a dream job actually just getting your head down and working independently, focused on your own tasks? And you can learn a lot about what you might want from a day-to-day job based on that as well. Does the company align with my values? So finding a cultural fit with your employer is actually a lot more important than you might think. And that kind of comes down to two perspectives. So one of them is the impact of your actual role. So as well as finding your job interesting day to day, whether or not you feel like you're having an impact in the long term can have a real impact on your career fulfillment as well and how happy you are in your job. But also, you might want to think about how your company or the company that you're applying to tackles values that are important to you. So maybe sustainability or diversity, equity, and inclusion, or how they approach working culture or core values. Because finding that your kind of cultural fit is what they might call it. But yeah, working for a company that broadly aligns with your values can make a big difference as well to your job satisfaction. So yeah, thinking about the wider impact of the role and the wider impact of the company as well. And then this is probably the most important question out of the entire list. And it sounds really obvious as well, but if you were offered the job, would you actually accept it? I would say don't waste your time by applying for jobs that you wouldn't actually want to accept in the end. Um, We'll get onto this in a moment when we come on to Dylan's next slides, but employers do really value passion. And I think if your heart's not in an application, that also means your application is probably not going to go as well as if you really were keen on the role. So definitely try and save yourself a bit of time by only applying for jobs that you really would be excited to accept if you were to be offered them. Cool. So that brings us on to Dylan's next section. So I'll hand back over to you.
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, so we're moving into essentially looking at what employers want to see. Um, and we're going to start with a quick poll. So it should pop up on your screen now. And you could just basically answer the poll with what value you think employers value most in new grads joining them. Um, there might be a couple in there that you think would be valued, but try and pick the one that's number one in your opinion.
Oh, I can see the poll is populating.
Yeah, it's popping off. Uh, Quite an even split. I'll just give it another few seconds.
Yeah, really interesting to see people's responses trickling in. I did kind of give a bit of a spoiler there when I was talking about passion previously, so apologies for that.
No, 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 all good. Interesting to see problem solving skills actually ranking as high as they
Mm,
are. Um, Cool. So this is a question that we ask students every year as part of our annual research, but it's also a question that we ask employers. Um, and what's interesting is there's often what comes about is a bit of a disconnect. So a couple of variances actually from what you guys have given, but generally speaking, when we poll the entire Bright network, the sort of things that tend to come out, or this is what came out last year, is the number one being existing industry experience, and number two being a 2-1 and above, followed by communication skills. And resilience you can see down there at number 10. And what's really interesting about this is when we then ask employers what they value the most, what comes out is a little bit different. So passion for business actually comes out at number one, followed by resilience at number two. So I think there's a lot of disparity between the two, but the main one that comes out to me is resilience. Essentially, we're not aligned there. And the way to think about the job search is almost there's two sides to it, right? There's you guys, the students that are applying to these, and then there's the employers. And we want to make sure in an ideal world that they're as aligned as possible. So what I just wanted to do is go through these top three from the employer's point of view, just to try and give you hopefully some helpful tips on how you can make sure you're showcasing these in the process. So the first one, passion for business, I always think sounds really weird initially because how can you show passion for a business that you've never worked for? But really, I think one way of almost translating this is how can I make sure that in my application I'm sending in, it's clear that I've researched and it's not generic. And this sounds like it's going to add loads of time onto the application process. But realistically, I think with just 15 minutes of research, you can really improve your CV massively. So when I was applying to jobs out of university, something I would do is just use things like the About Us page on their website and use that as almost my starting point. The good thing about that is because it's from the employer, these are usually the things that they're most proud of. So if you can just pick out a couple of these and personalize your application process, sorry, your application that you're sending in, your CV, and then also if you get to an interview, there'll be a really good talking points there, or potentially areas you could ask questions on. I think that is one way of showing passion for the business, which again can be tricky because you've never worked there. So it's those little things that I think can help you stand out. Resilience um, is tricky because I mean, what does it mean? How do you showcase resilience in a CV or like a application process? Um, I think really what they're looking for here is examples of times where potentially you've had to go above and beyond. You might have had to work outside your like typical hours, whether that's on a university project or just like a part-time job you've had. Um, to be clear, this isn't an excuse for employers to be asking you to stay late every single night. I think that's probably an example of bad company culture. But there are going to be occasions where you have to work outside your hours, where you have to put in more effort than you might normally have had to on a project, whether that's because of like a deadline coming up or maybe something's gone wrong and it's a bit of crisis management. So there are going to be those times where you have to show that resilience. Um, so what I would really recommend is just making sure you're showcasing times you've gone above and beyond, times you've put in more effort than was expected to sort of get the desired result. And then the third one being commercial awareness. Again, it's not something you come across in everyday life, the phrase commercial awareness. But basically, you just want to have some awareness of what's going on in the world, and more specifically within the sector that you're applying to. Again, hopefully this should be easier once you've narrowed the job search a little bit, so you're focusing on a few key sectors. In terms of how you can sort of stay commercially aware, I think these days it's sort of easier than ever. My recommendation is just have your news app of choice on your phone. For me, I just use BBC News, and every day I'll just have a quick flick through, see what's going on in the world. You can also customize your news feed. So if there's particular industries or particular areas that you want to stay up to date with, you can make sure you're seeing those articles come through. And also we'll get into ChatGPT in a little bit, but this is an area where I think it can be really helpful because you can just get a quick digest on what's happening in the industry. I've set it up for myself where I work with like a number of different partner employers at Bright Network, and so every week I basically just get ChatGPT sends me a breakdown of what's happening with all these employers. And fact check it, of course, because you don't know what's going to come through. But for me, it's just a really helpful way to make sure I'm keeping up to speed with what's happening. Cool. So those are the top three. We're moving now into quality versus quantity. And in my experience within this role over the last sort of 5 years, right now this is the number one trend that's coming not just from you guys, from the students applying to jobs, but also from the employers as well. It's just the biggest theme trend that's happening at the minute, and for numerous reasons. Um, but what we want to do is first of all showcase essentially what employers are saying about it. So you can see here from Goodwin, a law firm, the importance of tailoring your job application to the specifics of the firm and the role. They're saying that's essential. So you need to make sure that that's essentially what they're looking for in the job applications that are sent in. And then Teach First are yeah, essentially making the point here that your job search isn't a numbers game, which I know can be tricky. We'll get into the specifics of this in a minute, but this is what the employers are telling us. And then Ocado finally, basically again, similar point, but just putting the emphasis on one good application is going to trump 10 sort of mediocre, unpersonalized applications. And I don't mean mediocre in any way other than just not as putting as much effort and time and personalizing it to that employer. So it really is, I guess, a balancing act, the quality versus quantity. Looking at like the quality side of things, of course, and I guess this seems obvious, but a tailored application is just going to stand out more for a hiring manager. It just is. It's going to, amongst the sea of generic applications, it will stand out. There's also the essentially more time you put into an application, the better it's going to be. So if you set aside sort of more time to work on what you're sending out, the quality's naturally just going to be higher. And then that point on research again. So research is the only way to really make the application stand out if you want to personalize it, because you need to know more about the company. And it also, I suppose, helps you find out if it's going to be the right company for you, coming back to Sarah's point. Um, but of course, there's a drawback where This is where the balancing act comes in because there's that whole thing of putting all your eggs in one basket. And so if you only apply to a couple of jobs, even if they're fantastic applications, there's still a chance that they won't go through. And then you obviously don't have as many feelers out there. On the other side, if you went for like a quantity approach, there's definitely the case that if you're putting less time into the applications, you are going to be able to send off more and also spend more time on your studies. So you can have basically be able to make more use of your time that you're spending sending off applications. Um, it can also feel safer, and I totally get that. If you can say at the end of the day, I've sent off 50 job applications, you're going to feel like, right, I've made a really tangible step towards it because I've put all this work in, I've sent off all these applications. So it's going to feel, you're going to feel it maybe potentially a little bit more certain. And of course, there's a lot of competition. I think if you're keeping up with the news on this at all, you'll know that job applications are really high right now. So each vacancy is essentially receiving a lot of applications. Um, and it feels like the more you send off, the higher your probability of securing a job. But unfortunately, it's not just as like binary as that. It's not the case of the more applications I send out, the better chances of securing a job. For the instances you mentioned earlier, it's just not necessarily the case. And I guess it's about the differentiation between speed and doing things quickly versus efficiency. So if you can cut down the volume slightly and just put more effort into like a handful of applications, that would definitely be our advice, but not neglecting quantity. Because I think it would be naive of me to say that you should just send off one or two really high quality applications. You do obviously need to have there's a certain number. That number isn't specific, so that it's difficult to say. Um, but essentially I would say cut down the scope of what you're applying to where possible and just try and like focus on the ones that you really think one, as Sarah said, that you're going to actually want to accept if they were to get back to you, and two, like actually interest you, because I think that makes the whole application process a little bit easier. Um, Yeah, so I guess to summarize that, the best approach would be putting effort into each submission, which can be tricky. And I know if you're doing the same thing over and over again, it gets progressively more difficult to stay as engaged and motivated through the process. But that's unfortunately the only way to do it. And then tailoring it to each company. So just making sure that before you send it off, take a read through and just making sure that it's really clear who you're applying to and why you're applying to them. Sending off multiple wealth applications. Yeah, so essentially pick the companies that you're going to want to apply for and just make sure those are the ones that you're focusing on. As I said earlier, unfortunately, there's no magic number. And it really does depend on things like the location, specialism, the company sizes, economic factors. But on the flip side, it also means that if you're potentially struggling with rejection in one area, you could potentially look at diversifying where you're applying to. So I'll talk about this later, but essentially for me, when I first graduated, I was really struggling to find a job in Glasgow where I'd gone to uni. And so I got to a point where I had to think, right, it's not working in Glasgow. I need to expand my where I can work. And doing that really helped me. So I guess you can look at it from both ways. Um, cool. Back to Sarah to talk about ChatGPT.
Cool. Yeah. So this is really, really tied to what Dylan has just gone through on the kind of quality versus quantity side of things. And I think, yeah, a key point Dylan mentioned that I'll definitely be coming back to is speed versus efficiency. So moving quickly doesn't necessarily mean moving efficiently, which is why it's really important if you're going to use AI tools to support with your applications to use them responsibly. So just to briefly cover, I guess we may have already given this impression a little bit, but how do employers feel about AI being used in job applications? Well, we have over 300 employer partners at Bright Network, and Dylan works with plenty of them. And what they've told us is that they're kind of fed up of seeing candidates focus too much on application quantity rather than quality. And what that means is that they are getting more applications than ever. So job application volumes are at an all-time high, which means hiring managers and companies are snowed under with applications for jobs. So obviously that's tricky for us. It's tricky for employers as well. But I guess a key thing we wanted to pull out here is that lots of these applications are really hard to tell apart because they've been so heavily written by ChatGPT. So what our employers have told us is that they keep seeing the same application again and again, and they might have thousands of applications for one role, but so many of them are just ChatGPT saying the same things. I think Dylan, you had a client tell you something similar recently on just like seeing the same opening paragraph or something. Was that right?
Yeah, I think they essentially had all the answers in a spreadsheet and they searched the first opening sentence, I think, and it came back, I think they had like 17, 18 of like the exact same. So it's yeah, not something they're wanting to see, unfortunately.
Yeah, so I think that just outlines that even though in your mind, maybe you're making this big efficiency by using ChatGPT, if you're not careful with how you're using it, you could actually be damaging your chances rather than helping yourself. So one point we wanted to talk about is how can employers tell if you've used AI? Well, it is actually very easy to spot an answer that's been copied and pasted from ChatGPT, partly because of the telltale signs of ChatGPT writing, which I'm sure that you are all very familiar with at this point. But these kind of long essay style paragraphs, lots of fancy filler words like ultimately, additionally, furthermore, and so on, a kind of generic and robotic tone of voice, and then filler. So I kind of come from a bit of a copywriting background. So this is my major bugbear with AI tool writing, is that there's so many words, but it doesn't actually say much. And employees notice that too in applications as well. However, if you use AI as a tool and not as a replacement for your own work, it shouldn't be obvious. Um, and then, yeah, just to mention again what we've just talking about, but employees know what ChatGPT thinks of their company. Um, we have a senior talent partner here at Bright Network called Shanice, and I was chatting with her recently, and she said she could recite ChatGPT's answer to "Why do you want to work at Bright Network?" because she's read it so many times in various people's applications. So again, you might be thinking in a relatively individualistic way about your application, but it might actually help to put yourself in the context of everyone else having access to the same tools as you, and you still need to make sure that you stand out from the crowd. So I'm going to go through some quick fire do's, don'ts, and definitely do nots when it comes to AI. So number one, do create your own drafts and ask AI to help tweak it to your taste. So for example, if you're like me and your first draft of everything is quite long and wordy, you can ask ChatGPT to help you cut back on word count, but it's still ultimately your writing in that first draft. Um, don't ask ChatGPT to draft your answer for you because that's where you'll lose the uniqueness of your own voice. You'll probably end up with some of that filler and some of that really recognizable phrasing that employers are fed up of seeing. Definitely do not copy and paste directly from ChatGPT into the application form. Um, we have seen some horror stories where people forget to remove the actual prompt from the application form. So you can see stuff like, yeah, sure, I can make this sound more human for you. And then going into the application, which is absolutely a dead giveaway that you've used AI. And you will be headed for rejection if that's the case. Um, I should clarify if you will be headed for rejection if you've left the prompt in your answer, not if you've used AI. Again, it's all about using AI responsibly. So another do is you can use AI tools for support with tailoring. So Dylan talked a fair bit about tailoring your application, showing that you've researched the company, showing that you actually care and you have this passion for the business that employers are looking for. Well, actually, AI can help you pull out some key things from example. For example, their about pages that the company might want to see reflected in your answer. So for example, you could say, here's my CV, which you've created yourself, obviously. Um, how can I tailor it or tweak it slightly to align with this job at this company? And that's where ChatGPT might be able to make some helpful suggestions without doing the work for you. Don't use AI to create a CV layout. I will say, from a UK perspective, ChatGPT is mainly trained on US data. So, as well as spellings being US focused, if you use ChatGPT, you might also end up with a few different cultural nuances. Like sometimes ChatGPT might tell you to put a photo in your CV. You do not need a photo of yourself on your CV. That is standard in other places, but not in the UK. And also be careful not to let AI tools exaggerate your experience because ChatGPT, as we all know, loves to keep people happy by telling them what they want to hear, but that might not necessarily always be true. Definitely, definitely do not submit anything without proofreading and fact checking it yourself. You might think, oh, I don't need to fact check something that I wrote the first draft of. But actually, you do, because a little bit of exaggeration here and there, and you might find that ChatGPT has made your application less honest than you intended it to be. So I guess all of this is to say, key takeaway, do use AI as a tool, but never as a replacement for your own work. Don't share any information with AI that you actually would rather remain private. So just be careful. It's not the end of the world if you have done this before, but just be careful with things like your address, your contact details, and so on. And definitely, definitely do not, from me, having tested a lot of the different AI tools out there available to help you with your CV and your applications, don't pay for any tools. If an advert tells you that a particular software is absolutely guaranteed to get you a job, that's just the marketing. Ultimately, these tools are all very similar to one another. And if you learn a few prompting techniques and you practice using AI, you will get good enough to not need any of these extra paid features. So I would say save your money and do it yourself, but definitely don't fall. There's quite a few kind of scammy tools out there, shall we say? So yeah, save yourself the money and don't pay for any of these over-promising tools. And then just a quick note as well, we have actually had previous webinars completely about the topic of using AI responsibly for applications. So if you have any more questions or you want to know more on this topic, you can scan the QR code on screen now. And on the right-hand side of the screen, you can also see a screenshot of a guide that we created, which is all about how to use AI responsibly for your career. So we have plenty more advice on this topic on our website available if you'd like it. But that's all we'll cover for today because we also want to go through what to expect from an application process. And we'll essentially go through step by step all the different things that might be expected of you as you apply for jobs. So Dylan's going to take us through the first few.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, so starting with the CV, we've already touched on it a little bit, but I guess just to recap, it's the first impression the employer has of you, and they say you have 7 seconds to make a first impression. So it is really important to make sure that CV is sharp. So I think key things to look for are just like basic proofing to make sure there's no like typos, spelling mistakes, formatting issues that are coming through. But we do have a lot more information coming up on how to perfect your CV in a webinar. So if you scan this QR code, you'll be able to sign up to a webinar that's being held by Shanice on the Bright Network team. Shanice's got so much experience of looking through CVs, and also she's got so much experience sharing that knowledge with other people as well. So definitely one to miss if you just want to make sure that you're sharpening up your CV where possible. And then there's written applications. So I guess this can take the form of a cover letter for a lot of processes, but essentially it's your chance to showcase your motivation for joining the company, but also what makes you special. So there's a couple of quick tips here to make sure you're making the most of this. So first of all, making sure you're introducing yourself. I've spoken to employers recently who said there's been quite a few applications coming in where just little things weren't happening, like introducing yourself at the top or signing off with your name at the end. And those little details just show that you've essentially given it your full attention. When you're putting it together. Also make sure you're sort of showcasing why them. It comes back to that passion for the business point. But if you can just showcase in that opening written application why you're choosing this role in this employer specifically, it'll go a long way. And then last but definitely not least is why would you be a good fit for them? And I think this ties quite a lot into the previous point on sort of why this employer. So tying yourself and the employer together and showing why you'd be a good fit for the role. And then we've got psychometric tests. So a little bit different to the previous two we went through. Essentially, this is just trying to get a feel for you, particularly with entry-level roles, because you don't necessarily have, very understandably, don't have sort of vast amounts of experience. The employers use this as a way just to get a little bit of a feel for how you work and what you're interested in. It's supposed to be an objective way to sort of score that kind of criteria without the experience. And a lot of the time, it'll just be an online test. Sometimes they happen at assessment centers, but a lot of the time, it'll almost be a gamified test that you do at home. In terms of how you can sort of nail these, sorry, in terms of the different types that can come through, there's like logical reasoning, verbal reasoning, numerical reasoning, all the reasoning, personality tests as well. And then, as I said before, gamified tests. The good thing is because you quite often will do these at home online, there's loads of resources in terms of practicing these. There's not necessarily a right or wrong answer when it comes to a psychometric test, but a big part of it is almost knowing how to take the test. And I also find with me personally, the more I know about something, the less sort of anxious and nervous I'll be to do it. So I would recommend doing as many practice ones as you need until you feel sort of confident to take the real thing. Um, cool, and hand over to Sarah to cover the next three.
Cool. Yes. So then after potentially your CV, written application, psychometric tests, again, you might not have all of these come up in an application process, but these are all the different steps that might come up. You could have an assessment center, also known as an assessment day. It's usually just one day where essentially you and a bunch of other high performing candidates will be invited to an office or a kind of conference center or something, and you'll be assessed all together with various activities. And it's essentially a chance for the employer to see what you're like in situ. So, actually, within a working environment, how do you cope? How do you work? What's your way of thinking? So these days are often made up of different parts, but usually there'd be some kind of interview, whether that's one-on-one or you and a few other candidates being interviewed at once. You might have those psychometric tests or personality tests. Um, there's usually an element of group collaboration as well. And you might also have presentations, and also there's usually like a lunch or a dinner or some kind of social networking aspect. Um, Social or networking, sorry, not social networking, um, aspect as well, where you can get to know people. So one of our top tips is make a good impression on everyone you meet. So even though the other people there that you're being assessed alongside are technically your competition, for the day, they are your colleagues and you need to be able to work with them. And so show that you can work in a team as well. This is a really important skill for almost all employers. I can't think of a situation where getting on with your colleagues wouldn't be a strength. So yeah, don't feel like they're your competitors on the day. Don't try and stand out or speak over other people. Be collaborative, be a good teammate, show what you'd be like as an employee. And do research and preparation beforehand. So often on assessment centre days, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions as well. So think of a few questions that you might want to ask the company. So for interviews, we all know what a job interview is. They can be one-on-one, they can be you're interviewed by a panel, they can be virtual, they can be in person. There's so many different formats for them now, but essentially they are always a chance for the employer to get to know who you are as a candidate. And I find interviews incredibly nerve-wracking. Like I find them honestly just terrifying. But one tip that I've found helpful for getting over that fear is remembering that it is more of a two-way street than you might think. So again, the employer is trying to see if you're a fit for their role. They're not trying to test you or frighten you. And equally, you being a good fit for the role you're being interviewed for is in everyone's best interests. So ultimately, you're trying to figure out if it's the right role for you as well. So thinking of that two-way street might help a little bit with nerves. So at least it has for me. We're not going to go into too much interview advice because later this week on Thursday, we have an interview masterclass coming up by our very own Ali Monk. He is our people director at Bright Network. And he's interviewed hundreds of people in his career. He's got years and years of experience. And he is an absolute pro interviewer. He will be hosting a webinar just like this one, which is completely focused on interviews. I highly recommend going along. Ali is so good at explaining things in a really easy to understand way. And also, I think a lot of people focus on early applications and then later when they actually get through to the next stage, they're like, wait, how do I do an interview? Often an interview is the last stage before you get an offer. So you do need to be able to land the interview as well. So please sign up by scanning the QR code. I think it will be really valuable for you. And Then the next stage that we've decided to add is dealing with rejection. Um, so the reason we've added this as a slide on the kind of stages of application process is because, especially now in this day and age, but always kind of throughout careers, I think dealing with rejection is an inevitable part of the process, and it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when you get rejected from a job. So we wanted to share some tips for coping with that. Starting with take a breath and get some perspective. When you first get a rejection, it can feel like it's a reflection on who you are as a person. You might feel like that makes you a bad person or someone that's unhireable. But actually, just give yourself the perspective. It just means that you were not a fit for this particular role at this particular point in time. That's all it means. And remind yourself that even the most successful people have inboxes full of rejections. So that person that you follow on LinkedIn and love all their posts and think they're the coolest person ever and you want to have their exact job, that person has an inbox full of rejections, I promise. So yeah, just tell yourself that and remember that you're not alone in this. Absolutely, everyone faces them at some point. The next step, I guess, is rejections are somewhat out of your control, but what you can control is how you react to them. So you can ask for feedback if you can. Some employers might say they don't have capacity to give people feedback, but if you can, politely request feedback where it's appropriate. And I would also add here that in every career, in every sector, resilience is something employers want to see. Responsiveness to feedback is something employers want to see. So if you can get used to taking rejection and turning it into a learning opportunity, you will be making yourself a better candidate as you go. If you can't get feedback, which realistically you might not be able to because employers don't have a huge amount of time, they might not be able to give you feedback, try and self-reflect on your experience of rejection. What can you learn from the experience that will help you next time? And I will add here, as a perfectionist myself, don't just use this as a stick to beat yourself with. It doesn't mean that you could have done better or that you should have done better. When I say reflect on what you could have learned from it, that could also be what have you learned about the industry or what have you learned about the role that you were applying for and how can that context help you next time? It doesn't always have to be that you need to do better. Sometimes you do your best and you still don't get the role because it's competitive, and that's okay. Dylan, I don't know if you have anything that I haven't covered that you want to weigh in on, just in terms of dealing with rejection.
Yeah, just I mean nothing like major to add, but I just from my perspective on it, when I graduated uni, I really struggled to find a job. So I think it was a full year essentially before I properly got onto the career ladder. And I think during that time I gave potentially some of the worst interviews that have ever been conducted. Like yeah, they're terrible. But I think what helped me is realizing that like interviewing or these applications, they're like a skill in themselves. So when you first start doing them, it's almost like you need to practice ultimately. You'll get some outliers who are just who are mavericks and they're able to fly through application processes. But for the vast majority of people, me included, that just wasn't the case. So the first sort of um yeah, the first large number of interviews I did were really, really bad. But then as you build up that like skill, and that's resilience in itself, right? As you build up that skill, it gets a lot easier. So it's almost like you wouldn't show up to the gym for the first time ever and expect to be able to bench press 150 kilos. But if you keep going consistently, you'll, get closer and closer to that. So I think treating the rejection as almost like a chance to learn, which sounds really corny and is really difficult to do at the time. But for me anyway, it was the only way to sort of break through that like plateau when it came to sending off applications.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. Um, I love that gym analogy. That is how I approached the gym the first time I went. So, cool. And we just to end on a lighter note, as much as dealing with rejection is kind of a when and not an if. The same goes for accepting an offer. You will eventually find a job. You will eventually receive that amazing email or phone call saying that you've been hired. So just a few tips to leave you with this is pick up your phone. Um, a lot of the time, hiring processes do work with phone calls. So if you're expecting to maybe be hearing back from jobs, don't assume something is a spam call. Pick up your phone to all the spam calls that you receive, just in case it might be a job offer. When you receive your contract, make sure you read it. You would be surprised by how many how many things are written in that contract that maybe you didn't notice until further down the line, and then you've already signed it. And read your contract and ask questions as well. You will have some kind of HR point of contact. You can ask them whatever you want about what's in the contract, but don't be afraid or intimidated to ask questions. They're not going to yank back your offer just because you asked too many questions. That's not going to happen. And finally, celebrate when it does happen, because it's a great achievement as well. So we've talked through a huge amount today, I think. We've covered a lot of different aspects of the application process, but there's a lot that we haven't covered. So I would encourage everyone to sign up to the rest of our webinar series and also our October events that are coming up. They are a great way to meet employers, network with employers. We've got Proud to Be coming up for LGBTQ students, grads, and allies as well. So everyone is welcome, and an opportunity to meet some great firms. We've got diverse legal leaders. So if you are looking at a career in law, whether that's you're studying law, want to do a law conversion, want to be a paralegal, whatever it might be, this will be a great event for you. Black talent in banking. So if you're Black heritage and looking for a career in finance, this is going to be an amazing event, with some top banks joining as well. And then finally, we've got Social Mobility Matters coming up on the 29th of October, where we'll be talking about social mobility. And also, once again, you'll have the opportunity to network with our amazing employers. So I am going to leave this up on the screen so you can scan the QR code and sign up. And meanwhile, we will get started answering some of the questions. So thank you so much to everyone who submitted a question throughout the session. We will start. Dylan, maybe I can kick this one over to you from a kind of employer perspective. How do I show passion for a business via a CV?
Yes, I think it comes back to something we've mentioned a couple of times, which is that like research piece. So I don't think it's a case of going through your entire CV and customizing every single part of it, but almost just making sure, especially with the CV, because it's very streamlined, that you haven't really got many words there to play with. But I think just making sure everything in your CV and is emphasizing the right parts of your experience or what you're interested in. It's almost like if you read through that About Us page or you do your research on the firm, you're going to have a rough idea of the kind of things they're looking for. So I would just take the time to read through your CV and make sure you're almost checking off a few of those. Just, I guess, it's that fit, isn't it? So making sure that you're showing that you're a good fit for this role and the company.
Nice. So next question is, I think I can take this one. How can you leverage networking when doing job applications to ensure you're recognized more than other candidates? So yeah, you probably have heard phrases like your network is your net worth and stuff like that about the importance of networking. Um, and if you are a big networker, it's definitely something that you should aim to show in your application. If you're not a big networker, it's never too late to start. And I will encourage you to scan the QR code once again, for these events where you can do just that. Um, but I would say the cover letter or the kind of written application section is a great place to reference any context you have with the employer. So quite often when we speak to our members who've secured jobs through Bright Network, they will say, okay, as an example, I went to diverse legal leaders and I met McFarlane's and I chatted to a representative. I referenced that in my application and then again at the interview, and then I met someone else. And so having these like initial conversations with people at career events or career fairs is actually kind of perfect fodder to put in that like introduction and motivation section of your cover letter and application. So I would say that's where it should slot in.
I would say as well, if you are going to networking events like this, from speaking to employers recently, something they really, really value is like specific questions. So if you go to, let's say you're going to Proud to Be or Diverse Legal Leaders, pick out a couple of firms that you really want to speak to, those firms that you've identified as places you'd like to work, and just make sure you're going there, even if it's you've got the questions written on your phone, you're going there showing that you've like put in the effort, and I think they're more likely to sort of remember you that way. At least that's what I've seen.
Yeah, definitely. Um, there's a couple of questions here about how employers use AI. So I guess on the subject of AI, as an applicant, what are the chances that my application isn't viewed by the employer and ruled out by AI in the first place? And a similar one was, why should I take care writing my CV when employers won't take care to read it, but they'll just search for keywords? So I actually did a bit of research on this recently because I was really curious about, I guess, to what extent employers are using AI to screen applicants. Um, and I would say, from what I found from basically poking around some of our clients and asking questions, was that they're not using AI for screening as much as you would think. Um, and ultimately, at the moment, although this could change soon, so I don't want to speak for the future, but at the moment, there is usually always a human pair of eyeballs on your application. Um, if it's going to be rejected. So AI at the moment isn't screening people out automatically, but I will say that employers use technology called ATSs, so applicant tracking systems. And these tools basically help them manage the volume of applications they receive. So these tools might bring out certain things from people's applications, like keywords, or the AI might summarize a candidate or something. So that's what I would say is a slightly more realistic depiction of what is happening. Um, Dylan, would that chime with your experience? Do you have anything to add?
No, I agree. It's definitely not as like as simple as it'll just get screened out automatically. Like there is more going on there. And actually, just from having like seen behind the scenes for some of these employers, it's definitely I would say it's surprisingly more personal than you think. Like a lot of the employers will almost be referencing specific applications that they've seen come in and that like they really like the look of. So there is space to stand out. Obviously, there's a degree of AI being used on both sides of it. But I would say I was surprised myself, similar to you, Sarah, at like how it's not being used in the way I thought it was, essentially.
Yeah, and actually another point that just came to mind is I think people sometimes get mixed up between AI and automation. Um, you probably will have an automated email at some point from a client, not a client, an employer. Um, if it's a rejection or saying that you're through to the next stage, that's probably because of the software that people are using. Um, and they might put you in a bucket of people, and if you're put in that bucket, you're automatically sent a particular email. However, that doesn't mean that AI has made the choice to put you in that bucket. There is still a person choosing how to set up those programs and those automated emails. So I would be careful about just assuming that anything automated is done by AI. It is often just done by a person who's got some automated emails set up to help them save time. Um, cool. So let's go for, would you say there are more unsuccessful candidates this year compared to previously, considering the current climate and the reduction of entry-level jobs due to AI and other factors? A heavy question. Um, I guess I can start and say, from my perspective, that probably is the case, but I'm not too close to the numbers, so I'm not sure, yeah, to what extent. Dylan, I feel like you might be a bit closer to the industry on this one.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, it's just the case that they've included it in the question. Essentially, yeah, there's so many factors to go into it. It's definitely not a single one. There's so much change happening. Just I guess it's in the world right now, but it's like having an effect on job applications and careers. So yeah, essentially, there will be more rejections right now, just as to the nature of everything that's going on. But I guess that's why it's so important to make sure you're doing things like personalizing CVs and applications and doing the research because I think it's more important than ever now to make sure you're standing out. Yeah, long gone are the days when I suppose just having a degree would be enough to kind of get a foot in the door with a lot of these companies. Um, so yeah, I think that's where everything we've talked about today really comes in.
Yeah. And one more question because it is 2 o'clock. But I saw this one come up twice, I think. So we'll just answer this one quickly. Which is, should you write, wait, I've lost the question now. It was something like, should you write a cover letter? Do cover letters actually make a difference? If it's not compulsory, should you still include one, or does it hurt your application if you don't send one? Um, I would say, as annoying as it is, cover letters are often optional. But if you add something that is optional, that is automatically going to make you stand out against other candidates. This is where you can really expand on what's on your CV by showing what makes you different and what makes you a good fit for the role specifically, particularly in that kind of that structure Dylan talked through of why you, why them. Um, but yeah, this is also a place where if you just decide to upload an AI generated cover letter, that probably isn't going to help you stand out. But I would say it probably is a good opportunity. Like if you are given more space to potentially show off who you are and why you're great, you should probably take it. Um, yeah, Dylan, anything else?
No, I agree. I suppose it's the opportunity cost. The worst thing that happens is you submit it and it's not read, but the best thing that happens is it helps you stand out. So I'd probably err on the side of submitting one personally.
Great. That is all we have time for. But thank you so much all for joining. We've really enjoyed hosting you this session, and hopefully you've learned something helpful to support you with application season. So thank you all so much, and we hope to see you at the next few webinars later this week.